So when you're traveling to these different locations and you're seeing a lot of the common things, did you kind of have a moment of, there's a lot more of this going on than I think the normal person would think about? What was that like?
Oh, absolutely. I was like, why are we not hearing about this? Why are we so, numb to this happening in our world when there's estimated 50 million people that are entrapped in human trafficking. And yet there was not very much talked about. There's definitely not very many organizations doing anything about it, 12, 15 years ago. And so I was just appalled, really. It was like, I can quit my job. Other people can do it, but there's not enough people combating human trafficking. Everyone knows now that human trafficking is happening, but they don't know on the boots on the ground what's happening, what can we do, what is really going on with these individuals' lives, and we can tell them.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Today is an incredibly important episode because we're sitting across from Susan Peters. Now, she is the founder and chief advisor for Unbound Now. Now, in today's conversation, we're going to talk about how we can do better jobs at listening to the people who need our support in our communities, some of the challenges that we're facing on a macro societal issue when it comes to human trafficking. But before we kind of get into that stuff, I want to really learn about the origin story of this amazing human that sits across this digital table with me. Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited about it.
So, Susan, one of the things that I recognized in our previous conversation together was there was a time in 2012 when you said that you were praying in your living room to be able to support people in your community from an element of human trafficking. But before we got to that, you said that you were inspired by some of the experiences that you've had across your lifetime. So why don't we take it back to the very beginning, even if we were in high school, some of the things that you saw that challenged you to say, will I have the courage to step up and make a difference for people in my community? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about was I can remember as a child, and probably many of your listeners have hopefully were the same way. I remember learning about the transatlantic slave days and hearing about Wilberforce and some of the heroes that stood up against that, but it was totally against the grain, right? And I just thought, wow, would I be courageous enough? I mean, who doesn't like Harriet Tubman, right? But yet that was scary what she did. And so always kind of pondered, would I be that courageous? And then, of course, the Holocaust was so horrible. And we studied that in school. And again, there were families like the Ten Boom families and others, Bonhoeffer, that, entered into that fight to rescue people. And there's many, many heroes. And not that I sought to be a hero, that's for sure not it. And I'm not the hero of the story now, but I wanted to know that I was living with courage. I was living with caring for my fellow man, and I was living out what God created me to be. So that kind of was the backdrop of what motivated me ultimately.
And then we had some experiences where you were traveling across the world and you were meeting young boys, as an example, that had been, victims of human trafficking. So let's kind of talk about those early aha moments in experiencing some of the things that we kind of came across in our travels.
Yeah, so prior to 12 and a half years ago, before I started Unbound Now, I did travel a lot and for my job. And went to Uganda and I met child soldiers. These were just young men now, but they were children playing in the village that were literally kidnapped by the LRA or the Lord's Resistance Army and forced to be child soldiers, which is a form of human trafficking. And I remember being so intimidated at first to go meet with them. And then I'm like, these are just normal people. This was not what they wanted for themselves. And they were forced into this by their environment. And then I went to Thailand. I went to Haiti, went to the Dominican Republic, went to Cambodia. I mean, just different countries. Everywhere I went, just came face to face with stories of human trafficking of young boys, young girls that were being forced into brothels and losing their life, their health, their education, their families into human trafficking. And so that's where the burden just came, where I was like, I have to do something about this.
When you're traveling in a place like Uganda, as an example, and you come across a young boy, a child who is a part of the LRA, What is your first intuition? Do you question what is this young child doing with a weapon? Why is he hanging around these people? What was kind of like that initial discovery process like where that light bulb came on and says something seems interesting or wrong about this situation?
Yeah, I think the initial response is, why would he choose this? How did he get in this situation? Um, he wants to do this and he's a bad person, or even, you see people in the red light district in different countries. And the initial response is, why did they choose this? Why did they get here? Do they want out? But then when you start learning the stories of how their family members maybe sold them into it, there was debt bondage that they owed back, all kinds of different vulnerabilities that put people in this position that don't want to be there and don't find a way out, don't have a way out. That totally changes your perspective.
And the thing that I want to kind of dive into a little bit deeper in here is you've seen these instances happen all across the world. And so it seems like there's an undercurrent of commonality here with, individuals who find themselves in human trafficking where they've come across incredibly tough situations. But it doesn't matter if in Uganda or if you're in Thailand or all the different types of places that you've kind of come across. So when you're traveling to these different locations and you're seeing a lot of the common things, did you kind of have a moment of there's a lot more of this going on than I think the normal person would think about? What was that like?
Oh, absolutely. I was like, why are we not hearing about this? Why are we so, numb to this happening in our world when there's estimated 50 million people that are entrapped in human trafficking. And yet there was not very much talked about. There's definitely not very many organizations doing anything about it, 12, 15 years ago. And so I was just appalled, really. It was like, I can quit my job. Other people can do it, but there's not enough people combating human trafficking.
And when we talk about human trafficking, I want to do justice by the audience here by helping us explain what are the types of human trafficking that we see. Because often I think a lot of people, when they think about, human trafficking, they think about like movies with Liam Neeson, where, his daughter gets taken, I'm going to find you, I'm going to track you down. But there are so many different types of human trafficking. And I want to have you as an expert kind of lay the framework for the problems that we're seeing in our society so we can be more aware of the different types of trafficking that might be
Yeah.
going on.
Well, the bottom line is human trafficking is when someone exploits another human being for their profit. And so there's a trafficker involved who is coercing, forcing um, someone into servitude. And there's labor trafficking. So that could be even in the US, we have it where they're in agricultural fields, they can be in hospitality, they can be in restaurants. And so we don't recognize them in our communities because it looks like a normal labor. It looks like a maid in a hotel. They look normal, but then if you get involved in their lives and you realize they haven't been paid, they're forced to live in an apartment with 12 other people. Someone comes and picks them up and threatens them, don't go outside, don't make friends, don't talk to anyone, or you'll get deported. There's all of these things going on that has coerced them into servitude. So they're making a fraction of what they said and agreed upon at the very beginning. And then usually that person takes their documents. And so that's labor trafficking happens a lot. And of course, it happens around the world, whether it's the fishing industry in some parts of Asia. It can be brick kilns in India. There's all kinds of labor trafficking that goes on. What we primarily deal with is sex trafficking. And, that's when someone is coerced or forced into having to sell their body for someone else's profit. And that can happen in brothels. It can happen in someone's home. It can happen in their neighborhood. It can happen, where they transport them to other places. But the kids that we deal with in the US, they are living in their home, in their neighborhood, and being sold. And so people don't really realize how much domestic minor sex trafficking is happening. And that's really what we major on. And then there's organ trafficking. And, I've seen this, especially in war torn areas during the Syrian refugee crisis. We saw it. That kind of opens up when there's very exploitive refugee camps, things like that. And there's other ways that there's organ trafficking. That's a horrible, horrible situation. We don't deal with that, but there's several different forms of trafficking, but mainly labor trafficking and sex trafficking.
one of the biggest challenges that I feel like in having this conversation, because we're both here in the United States right now, is often the American lens thinks that these things are happening in different places. They're not happening here in our communities. So, how can I even help? And I know that you had an experience where you came across a 14-year-old who is in your local community. Let's kind of tell the story about that, because I feel like that really hits home when this stuff is happening in places that we think we know, but maybe we don't know the whole story.
Yeah. There was a group of girls that were recovered out of an apartment complex by law enforcement. And I got to talk to one of the girls, and she was 14. And she told me how she had befriended this older man. He was kind of feeling this father figure and lured her away and then put her in this apartment where several girls are. And they were out of school and being sold day in and night. They hardly sleep, they hardly eat. I mean, it's a horrific, horrific, brutal life. And she was there almost a year. And the law enforcement did make that recovery. And I'll never forget when she, told me her story. And then she looked at me and she said, "We didn't think anyone cared this was happening to us." And I just remember my heart just wanting to break and just say, "Yes, we care. We just didn't know." And these are the kids that we see in Unbound now. These are American kids. Most of our victims, 92% of them, are American kids that are in our schools, in our communities, going in and out of our emergency rooms or clinics, you know, that we're missing in our right under our noses.
This is heartbreaking to think about. One of the biggest challenges that I hear, even in kind of trying to tackle this problem, is often it seems like we are so distracted that we don't notice the things that are happening right around us. And when we don't notice those things, often the victims of these crimes think, hey, how could you not know what's going on because it's happening so close to your home? But like you said, we care. We just were not aware. And I want to use that as an opportunity to talk about how this organization of Unbound Now has kind of evolved. And we started out with a mission to raise awareness, and eventually that turned into a shift to survivor advocacy. Let's kind of talk about that evolution process and what you guys have been doing to raise awareness, and then the progression of the organization as well.
Yeah, when we started, we definitely wanted to identify those victims, domestic, minor sex trafficking victims, and young adults, and walk alongside them to help them recover their life. But we we would look up the ads that were in our own community on our own. I mean, this was when Backpage was there, Craigslist, just normal websites. These people are being advertised in our communities. And we would print off those pages and take them to law enforcement back, 12 and a half years ago. But they would just say, this isn't happening here because the awareness just wasn't there. So we thought, wow, we're going to have to start with education because our community really doesn't believe this is happening. And so we're not able to engage with those victims and make those recoveries and help them yet. And so that's where we started. We really started training anywhere. Now it is, we've kind of evolved where we call it youth prevention, and we go anywhere kids are that we can educate them on safety media. Because social media is so prevalent, but they're not safe on it, and they get lured away on that. The addiction of pornography and how it's linked to human trafficking and sexting, and they get sextortion, which is like a blackmailing, that kind of thing. And so we go into juvenile detention centers, schools, group homes, really anywhere kids are. And the kids were making outcries. And they were saying, I didn't know that was happening to me, because victims do not identify as victims. They think, I got mixed up with a bad boyfriend. This is what my stepdad makes me do. My mom's made me do this to pay our rent and for her drug habit. It's just our life. I don't know how to get away from this. Or I'm afraid to report this because they said they would get my siblings if I report this. And so until we go in and give them language, then they're like, oh my goodness, I think this is happening to me. Then they would make the outcries. And so we were also simultaneously, we built out training materials for professionals. So for law enforcement, for attorneys, for medical providers, and all of this is on our website, unboundnow.org. And we have continuing education certificates and things because it's so important. But when they were educated on it, then they weren't missing them. Before, there was a study, and something like 88% of trafficking victims were going through the ERs and medical facilities, and we were missing them because they're not going to say, hey, I'm a victim. They're going to come in and you're going to go, why does this 12-year-old have three STDs? But then they just give her the medicine and let her go. No one was saying, what's going on with this kid? Why is this 13-year-old pregnant and who's the father? Why is this girl coming in and she's been on the streets, but she's pregnant, she hasn't had any care, and she can't tell me where she lives? I mean, there were signs, but we didn't know what to do with it. And now we know what to ask because we've talked to enough survivors that they're telling us those stories and where they were missed. So we're able to educate people in the community that are coming face to face with the hotel people. They're like, yeah, the guy came in, rented a room, the girl's down there, and there's men in and out. I don't know what's going on. It's like, yes, we know what's going on. Call the police. So the education, we always say, awareness saves lives because it does.
Those early days when you're taking things off of back pages and Craigslist and everything else like that, and you're reporting these type of ads that are freely available for everybody to see, did it become frustrating to you to go to, law enforcement and other people and say, hey, this is what's going on right here? And they're like, you know what? I just don't think that that's true. Do you feel like you had to be like a belief breaker and a world shaker in order to get people to wake up to what's happening right in front of their face?
Yes, we did, but by nature, attorneys love justice. Law enforcement love to rescue and stand in the gap for them. So it wasn't like opposing a person because they didn't want to do anything. It was just, before they would had vice, they arrested prostitutes. They just it's not that they were bad people. They just had to shift the mindset. So when I would introduce them, let me introduce you to a 15-year-old that's been trafficked since she was 13. Let her tell you about her trafficker and how brutal it is. Then it's like, oh, heck yeah, how can we go get this guy? So it wasn't a resistance once they knew and wanted to do it because it's in their nature who they are. It had to be a mind shift because old school days, it was like, didn't they choose to do that? I'm like, you don't choose to be a prostitute at 12. No, you know. So it was an education more than now I will say, yes, there was some frustrating. One time, I took a friend of mine. He was on my board for a long time. He ended up becoming the mayor of our community. But we took ads in, and we were meeting with the Texas Rangers and some people from the district attorney's offices way back, when we were starting. And we're going, here's some ads that we printed off. And they're like, I don't think that can happen here. I don't think this is it. Like, where did you get this? What's going on? And they just really pushed it off. And then the Rangers were like starting to like, hey, we want to see this. They were like ready to fight. Those are tough guys. But the district attorney's office at the time, many years ago, a couple of DAs ago, was like, we don't want you guys getting in trouble and we have to go rescue you. And so they just shut it down. And a couple of days later, the FBI did a big operation and they rescued a bunch of trafficking victims. And the head of the Rangers called me and said, you are inviting us into this fight, and we missed it yesterday or a couple of days ago. And so it just took education, but now people are really on board and we're collaborating together. We work really tightly with all from HSI, FBI, local law enforcement. It takes us all. But the beginning days, there were some tough days. There were some disappointing days, of course, but it was worth it.
I mean, of course it's worth it. The amount of lives that you guys are impacting every single year is phenomenal. And based on, and you can correct me if I get these stats wrong, but over 1,000 victims you guys are supporting annually now. So think about the impact that you guys are having, not only on those individuals, but the families that they come from and everything else. How does it feel to know that you're having such a huge impact now?
It's amazing. I mean, I just looked at the numbers before we got on, and just in 2024, we're at 1,287.
Wow.
And every one of those, they're not a number. That's someone's sister, that's someone's little girl, that's someone's little boy. These are individuals and they're phenomenally resilient. When we can come around and we can get into what we do, but when we can support these individuals, they're going off to college, they're getting back in school, they're playing sports again. I mean, they can really recover their lives with support. And so it's absolutely exciting.
I mean, let's use that as a perfect segue to talk about, the process of advocacy not only comes from helping identify individuals when they're in a situation where they need help, creating interventions to go take them out of that situation, but how do we create sustainability in, I would say, the reintroduction to society and overcoming all the trauma that comes along with that negative experience?
Right. Well, what we do at Unbound now is we have advocates. So we call it our advocacy program. And they're highly trained because they're engaging in complex trauma of young people. So there's an extensive training that they go through, but they're phenomenal at connecting with that young person at the point of outcry or recovery. If we can make that connection within 72 hours, then the trajectory of them getting their life back and breaking away from the trafficker is huge. So we really try to engage them, and our law enforcement partners will call us to go on with them on a recovery. Sometimes we'll do some operations in the hotel rooms or Super Bowl, things like that, because they realize those young people are trained to not tell police anything. So if we can come alongside and say, I'm not a police officer, I'm not Child Protective Services, I'm here just for you, then we can bridge that gap and then partner with our law enforcement partners. But we are there to support that individual on that emergency response. We just kind of get them grounded, is what we call it, where they need food, they need clothing, they may need to go to the hospital to do a sexual assault exam, but we'll go with them so we can explain what's happening and support them. They may need safe housing, so we'll make those phone calls. So it's that emergency response, but then we do ongoing case management. And so we are there, and we have a crisis line. They can call us 24/7 and someone on staff will answer, but then they are assigned an advocate that will continue to walk with them as long as they want to receive services that do that long-term care, get them reconnected to their educational goals, whatever those things, get them in counseling, that kind of thing. And so it's really pretty amazing.
It's tough for me to be able to express the amount of gratitude that I have for people like you guys in Unbound now. Just the things that you guys are tackling are gigantic problems. And these problems are consistently happening around us in our community, but a lot of people don't even know because of the things that are happening in their everyday life. And so when we have people, I mean, even talking about the impact in 2024 alone with 3 months to go left in the year, you guys are already at 1,200 people who you guys are advocating for and saving their life, which is incredible. But I know that just doesn't happen in the state of Texas. You've created some amazing collaborations in the organizations that you've been able to work with. So let's talk about kind of the footprint that you guys have been able to establish now.
Yeah, we're super, super blessed. We're all over Texas. And then we have about 13 locations. And then the state of Louisiana passed legislature last year where they gave funding to their child protective services and said, we have to deal with the child sex trafficking here. And they called us and said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. You do great work. Will you come here? And so we are in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. I think we serve around 10 parishes. And already in 2024, they have served 170 kids. And they only serve 17-year-olds and below. So they are full tilt working, and I mean, it's some pretty brutal stories. I mean, we have one trafficker that we've got 5 of their girls in our care from one trafficker. And I mean, an insane amount of just horrific stories that are coming out of there. But again, they had a couple of them go off to college that they supported throughout the spring, and they're in college. And so they can get their life back, and the support means a lot. So I'm so thankful that we're there. And we're also in Mongolia. And that's a really important work because so many of their Mongolian, especially women, were being trafficked into China, into Russia. And so we work at the border doing recoveries. We've worked in the Ulaanbaatar International Airport where they allow us to go through the line and look through their paperwork, making sure that they're safe. And if they're not, we'll separate them from who we assume is their trafficker and take them into a private room. And so it's really great work there. We are in Poland because we responded to the Ukraine-Russian war. And that was, I mean, if you can imagine how many hundreds of thousands of women and children were coming across the border. So that made, Europe already has a horrible issue with human trafficking, but those traffickers saw that as a huge pipeline. And so we were there to intervene on those women, and we have opened an office in Poland. And then we are in Indonesia. So it's amazing work. I love what we get to do. So proud of our teams.
From praying in your living room in 2012 to having a global footprint and impact like you've been able to accomplish is nothing short of amazing.
Yeah.
One of the things that we often talk about here on the podcast is the role of the leader and the founder is to be able to cast a vision so large that other highly talented people can find themselves being successful in your vision. How have you been able to articulate the vision for Unbound now to get such talented, amazing leaders to be a part of this big fight?
I think number one, it's authentic. I believe in it. I mean, I'm like, what better thing can you give your life to? This matters. And we're making a tremendous impact. We're able to go to legislation and testify. We're able to talk with our, tomorrow I'm meeting with a state rep and a congressman. I mean, we're able to impact at such a high level and then down to these individuals, seeing them and get their life back. I had a leadership meeting this last Friday, and I looked around the room and my leadership team, and I didn't mean to do this. It's just like the Lord just bringing smart people. But I had, I think, 4 out of 5 of our attorneys that are on staff there. My CEO that we just hired in January, he is a Naval Academy grad, Kellogg Business School MBA. He is so smart, leading so well. And most of the other teams have masters in social work or other masters. I mean, it's just amazing. And I have lived experience, people on my teams too. And I mean, I wouldn't, I'd put them against any of those law people. So we have a good group of people, but I think, the vision is big, it's daunting, it's ending human trafficking, it's intervening on tens of thousands of lives is our goal. We have an underground drop-in center for trafficked youth. We serve 500 kids a year in one location. I want to open more. We have a safe house that kids are getting their life back. We need more. And so we need the resources, we need the people in this fight. And so it's just being able to tell people, invite them in, and they come. And I think they get to use their best skills. They get stretched. I'm like, first of all, if you're getting in direct services, how do you feel about being cussed out by a teen? Because when you're in trauma and you're doing a recovery, they don't know who they can trust. They've absolutely been beaten up by who they could trust, right? And then as far as the leadership, I'm like, I have a new leader in Louisiana, and she week into the job, she's like, I'm going to LSU to talk to the whole law school. And I'm like, yep. Then she called me a couple of weeks later and she's like, I am going to speak at all the judges and that have come in for this meeting. And I'm like, that's where we get invited into, because everyone knows now that human trafficking is happening, but they don't know on the boots on the ground what's happening, what can we do, what is really going on with these individuals' lives, and we can tell them.
One of the biggest challenges that I perceive from the outside looking in to your organization and trying to combat this macro issue is, how do we identify the impact that we're making just beyond the lives that we impact every day? So this year, 1,200 plus lives impacted, which is an amazing statistic. But when you think about the macro problem that we're dealing with on a global society factor, it seems like it could be a little overwhelming and daunting to consistently show up and fight this fight. So how do you keep the team morale high? How do you continue to lean into the impact that you guys are making? Because small things do add up, but often it can be totally understandable that this is a daunting fight and it's going to take a lot of work to get
Right.
done.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's huge, and it can be. I think you can get paralyzed when you look at how big it is and what we're doing. But nothing big happened starting big. It has to
I love
start
that.
small and keep at it, keep at it. I always tell the teams, work the next problem. Let's work the next problem. And we know that it is a multiplicity effect, and it's going to happen. It's changing law. We went to Poland and did a training with their prosecution, and I mean, just amazing judges and different people. And within a few weeks, they passed their first law identifying and protecting sex trafficked victims.
Wow.
So, I mean, the impact's huge. I took prosecutors and judges to Indonesia and Nepal. We trained 27 judges in Nepal. Like, those are nation changing. But we couldn't have done that if we aren't in the trenches, knowing where are those victims, how did they get trafficked, what are their stories, how do they get their life back, what does it look like in the judicial system, what kind of law enforcement do you need? You've got to be there, and then we have a platform to go broader and bigger. But you can't start without doing the really hard work day to day. I think a lot of times people don't want to do that. I mean, we've been at this almost 13 years now.
Mhm.
So it's not going to happen in a day. It's not glorious. It's not, I knew one person that, I mean, she went to a brothel with an organization 2 times and she wrote a book. Like she was a professional. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You know, that's not gonna work. That's not really gonna work. It's complex. It takes a lot of different agencies and you have to understand it. And you only learn that by getting in there and doing the work.
Do you feel like you ever hit like a clipping point, a point of like crescendo where once a law organization like the Texas Rangers, as an example, stood behind this and realized the fight that they were truly fighting, it was easy for you to get other type of law enforcement and institutions and organizations on board?
Absolutely, and it's important everywhere. It never stops. I mean, when I was in McLennan County, a judge called. This is the early days. Gosh, how many years ago now? 2015. And he called and said, "I hear you're doing great work. Come talk to me." And I had been wanting to start a coalition or a task force, but I'm like, there's so many great agencies that have been serving kids and families a lot longer than us. Would people come if I asked them to come? I was mulling this over personally. And I went and saw him and he goes, "You need to start a coalition." And I said, "Well, I know we do, but there's so many other." He goes, "No, you are the professional. You're the one doing anti-trafficking. You need to do it." And I said, "Will you put your name on it with me?" And he said, "Absolutely." And by that afternoon, he had sent a letter to the district attorney, the other judges, the superintendents, and said, "You're going to get an invitation from Susan Peters with Unbound now. I'm right there with her. Would you come?" I mean, it was amazing. And so we did that, and he stayed with me, and we started that task force. It's still going strong. We just turned over leadership this last year to my director there in a ADA, and they're just crushing it, working with Homeland Security and the all the different local law agencies and other service providers, and they're just doing amazing work. And so, but it took him lending his credibility to open that door. And the same thing happens when we go into a new community. I need to meet with the leaders. That's why we're new in East Texas, and so I am meeting with a congressman there and a state rep there. I'm meeting with the DA next week. Because if they get behind us, it's the door opener for us to do the work. And that's so, so important because these individuals need a lot of resources and we need the protection and the prosecution to really get justice for them. So it takes all of us.
One of the biggest things that I talk about in just building a business that is going to be sustainable is we have to change our framework in thinking we want to be successful in this decade to we want to be successful for as long as we possibly can. And extending out that time horizon, if you will, and trying to think about the long-term impact of your organization helps you make different types of decisions. So when you're trying to think about the next 15 years of Unbound Now, how are you kind of thinking about the roadmap in your mind as the founder of this amazing organization? What type of challenges do we have to overcome? What type of opportunities are you hoping to take advantage of?
I think the bigger you get, you've got to have better systems, right? I mean, we hit $10 million and we're above that now. And it's like, okay, overhaul everything. That's expensive.
Yeah.
Phone systems, computer systems, software systems, reporting systems. I mean, it's an overhaul at different levels. So that's very painful. The change management of that is very painful for people that have been with you and that kind of thing. So taking care of your staff, explaining things, communicating. We did some things well. We did things that, I want to do better the next time. And then the leadership part is critical because the bigger you get, you need higher level leadership that can carry the weight. I mean, my COO and myself were carrying the weight with a couple of other people, but really too much weight. And I'm like, I've got to have help. And that's where I sought out Brian, who I'd known for many years. He had been an advisor and he'd worked with us. And I was like, you got to come on board. And so just, I think being willing to go, what do we need at this next level? What has to change? Some people are going to like it, some people aren't going to like it. And then, letting people lead once they get in there. Brian is incredibly smart. He's not doing everything the way I've done it, but he's doing awesome. And so, and my director, when I put her in McLennan County and Bell County, now she's over Travis County. She's a phenomenal leader. And I loved hearing her say this, and I didn't mean to do this, but she says, Susan gave me credibility because she communicated such belief in me. Like her first week there, I made her do 3 live news reports. I knew she could do it. Plus, they interview you for. you're only on there this much. I knew she could do it, but I believed in her. And so she knows if you believe in me that much, then the other people believe in me and I can do my work. And I just think as leaders, we need to check ego at the door, be more about developing our people and letting them live their best lives leading. To me, that makes me the happiest. When I see my women going into these spaces and making decisions and leading their teams and speaking for us, or Brian doing that, I mean, that makes my heart come alive. And it's absolutely, if it was about me and me leading it, we would be very small.
There's an amazing author named Kevin Kelly. And in his most recent book, he said, "You lead by letting others know what you expect of them, which may exceed what they expect of themselves. Provide them a reputation which they can live up to." What do you think about that?
That's exactly right. I mean, when I introduced Brian, I'm like, this guy was a special forces, Navy grad, bomb tech, with SEAL teams, went to get his MBA. Like, this guy can figure it out. He can lead us to this next season. I mean, don't you think my team believe that? My donors believe that?
Absolutely.
And he does. He is doing it, and the same for the other people. So I love that. He articulated that really well.
I want to talk about the idea of trust. So, one thing that I recognize, and I talk to so many amazing leaders on the podcast, is often when we are the founder of an organization, we think that this mission, if you will, is going to be fulfilled by us and can't be fulfilled by anybody else as good as we can with our lived experience, the things that we've experienced along the way. How did you come to the settled position of realization that I need to bring in a leader like Brian, who can be the CEO of this organization, and I have to play the roles that give me the opportunity to be high leverage as the founder and chief advisor here? What was that kind of process like?
That's, people are asking me that a lot if that was hard, but honestly, it was hard for about a week. I
Mm,
had to wrestle through it for about a week. And then I was like, what's my goal? My goal is to reach as many people as we can, to change the trajectory of people's lives and the whole industry of human trafficking. I can't do that on my own. I have been gifted with a certain gift set, but so have these other people. And I'm better at this. I'm better at vision. I'm better at communicating, to our donors and people in our staff. I'm better at keeping the DNA and who we want to be as an organization and getting in there with the people. I really don't want to figure out which software we need to get. Or what the staffing needs are going to be in 5 years. I mean, that is Brian. He is like a nerd and can figure that out and loves it. I'm like, my mind's dizzy in an accounting, you know, built, whatever meeting after a while because I don't think that way naturally and other people do. So I think it's just recognizing what am I really good at and being secure that what you bring, no one else can bring,
mm,
but let them use their skills and their leadership. And the industry's changed right now. I don't care what industry or business you're in, it changes. And to me, if I stayed the leader, we wouldn't be growing in those changes, meeting the next need, and continue to have that impact. We need the younger people coming in with their ideas and the way they do things and the way they think to take us to the next level. And we've got to make room for them. And they're not going to stay if they're not shaping and building. You're good leaders unless they're doing that. And so I think you have to trust them to do that.
I couldn't agree more. There's a book that I often like to bring up into these episodes, and this is going to be an exercise between you and I, Susan, and kind of the practice of gratitude. So there's an amazing author out there. His name is Dan Sullivan. He has a book called The Gap in the Gain, and he said, one of the biggest challenges for people that have high achieving mindsets, which I would consider you, is often we find ourselves between where we are right now and where we're trying to get to, the big mission, the finish line, if you will. And when we get that wrong, that finish line often turns into a horizon. When we take one step towards it, it moves one step further away. Now, that's a dangerous place to be in with the big challenges that we're trying to face in our community. So I want to talk about the opposite of the gap, which is the gain. Do you often get an opportunity to slow down, thanks to the fireworks, and actually think about the gain that you've had since sitting in your living room in 2012 to 2024 and helping over 1,200 people this year alone? Do you ever get time to practice gratitude and think about all the things that you guys have accomplished to get to where you're at here today?
I actually really do. I try to lead really most of our bigger meetings with, this is where we came from. This is where, I mean, I talk about the days where my assistant chief called me about a 15-year-old and I'm writing her name on a napkin, which is totally illegal now, by the way. I mean, we didn't have the systems in place, but it worked. I got there. I got her to talk to me. She was a missing and exploited kid on the Nick Mick list. We were able to get her safely home. So, I don't want to lose the grit that we had in those early days. Having so many systems and new people coming in and they plug and play, but they don't have that grit. They don't have that passion. They don't have that. You just lay it all out on the field. And when you go home at night, you feel great about what you did, whether it was a win that day for that kid you were serving or not. I think it's important to do that. But I think the gratitude is to recount where you've come from and then the individual stories. This is why we do it. So I love going and visiting the team. I try to make it there when it's a day of them going over their cases. We call it a case review. And I like to listen. I'm listening to the clients they're serving. And I'm like, that's why we do it. That just makes me want to run through a wall.
I just want to say for everybody who's tuning in and watching today, this has been an absolute blessing being able to spend time with you, Susan. And the mission of things that you've been able to accomplish with Unbound now is just absolutely incredible. One of the things that we do here on the podcast is we have our previous guest ask our current guest a question. Now, this previous guest was the CEO of a large nonprofit organization, and he wanted to know, as a founder, as a leader in the organization, what does courage mean to you?
I think courage is when you're facing what looks impossible. To us, sometimes that's our finances. It takes a lot of money to operate at this level, the professionalism, having the best software, having the best systems for our people. It's a lot of money, and that can be daunting. So to us lately, that was a really big struggle. And so it looks impossible. And sometimes you just personally can get emotionally worn down. But I'm like, I gotta go for a walk. I gotta recount how the Lord has provided for us up to this point. And I like to say to myself, new level, new devil, come on, let's do it. you know? And so sometimes it's conjuring up the courage to say, let's do it. Let's work hard, and God always provides. Right now it's from here to year end. So I'm making tons of phone calls, and that's like grunt work. That's like what you did 12 years ago. And guess what? I'm doing it now. And so to me, it's the courage to do the little things that is going to make the same major impact. It's courage not to let your emotions get the best of you, because some days are hard. They really are. I mean, we've lost victims. They've been killed by their perpetrators. Those are hard days. But one summer, I had three 14-year-olds that we were serving that were in the wind, re-trafficked. And my team came to me and they go, why do we do this? Does it matter? And I said, yeah, it matters. They know we're out there. They know how to get a hold of us. We'll get them again. But it takes courage to stay in the fight when it's hard, when things seem impossible. But I like to say again, work the next problem. We'll overcome.
Well, Susan, I just want to say thank you for everything that you're doing. It's the small actions today that create a huge impact tomorrow. And I know that you are consistently putting in the work to make the small actions count for everybody who can't raise their hand in a moment of need. And I just want to say thank you for everybody who's tuning into the podcast here today. Unbound Now, how can we find more information about you guys? Where can we find? How can we help?
Yeah, go to our website, unboundnow.org, and there's lots of ways to jump in and help us and support us, and love to hear from any of your viewers.
Well, guys, thank you once again, and a huge round of applause for Susan Peters, the one who took that conversation by praying in her living room in 2012 to helping over 1,200 people this year alone with plenty of time to go. The impact that you're making is truly magnificent. That's been a wrap, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it.